listen to a chubby emu video of a guy
Hey, Dr.
dying
Bernard
from
here.
something or
Don't do
getting
what this
hurt.
person did. The chemical he took, at least in the bodybuilding and powerlifting circles I knew in Illinois about 15 years ago, they generally avoided it. So medically and personally, I'm telling you, don't do it. This person's also a YouTuber and he talks about his whole case there too. Check him out, link in the description below. A man had a life-threatening accident with a fat-burning chemical. This is what happened to his organs. CE is a 22-year-old man presenting to the emergency room unconscious. His brother-in-law tells the admitting nurse that he found CE naked in the shower on the floor while cold water was running all over him. When paramedics arrived, CE demanded they go away, refusing to get into the ambulance. And when he arrived to the emergency room, floating in and out of consciousness, he refused to tell doctors what exactly had happened. CE was a college student who enjoyed fitness. When he was in elementary school in the early 2000s, he got bullied.
Most of middle school, I was pretty much bullied relentlessly. I was kind of on the shorter side. I was overweight, very nerdy, didn't have a lot of friends.
When he got to high school, he started lifting weights for football. He gained muscle. No one was going to bully him anymore.
I came into 9th grade and no one recognized me. I looked radically different and I was starting to really grow into my body through weightlifting. And for me, weightlifting saved me from bullying. It saved me from being an outcast.
One day when CE was 17, his dad suddenly passed away.
It was completely unexpected. You know, one morning he's fine. I go to school. The next thing I know, I'm getting pulled out of school and my father's gone. I really blamed myself for the death of my father. His sudden passing threw me into this pain and loss, and the second that happened, everything else didn't really matter to me anymore. The next thing that happened is I started binge eating to try to fill that void.
Eventually, CE's physical body responded to all of this. He saw it as a direct response to coping with everything. He justified to himself that if he were to lose all of the weight, that it would be like redeeming himself. He started by heavily restricting his food. He would go on hours-long bike rides. He would skip class to be at the gym for hours every day. And he did get results, no matter how tough it was on his body. Eventually, CE plateaued, and his body adapted to the conditions. Looking for ways to keep going, he found a next step. He was going to have chemical assistance.
It was never a gradual thing. It was an immediate jump into that. And that's when I started kind of looking for ways to supplement that weight loss through supplements.
On a bodybuilding forum, CE read about stimulants and thyroid hormone as a way of increasing the body's metabolism. That'll burn fat, they said. He was able to buy them online and use them in combination together. He got some results from them for a while, but it wasn't enough. Back online, CE found out about a chemical named 2,4-dinitrophenol, DNP.
So once again, I turned back to these bodybuilding forums, and at that point I had heard of DNP, but it wasn't really talked about. But someone had mentioned it, and I started looking up DNP. You know, the stories you hear immediately are both extremes. You hear about people dying, but you hear about people losing 10, 15 pounds in the course of like a week or two. Looking at everything in that place of desperation, seeing 3 or 4 different YouTubers at the time, all these forum posts of people being like, yeah, you know, DNP's tough to be on, but like, I did it, it's fine, you'll be fine, sort of thing. I decided to make the commitment and find a source for it.
To someone doing their own research online, this was the perfect compound to get the job done, and CE started taking DNP. Immediately after taking a dose of his new weight loss chemical, CE felt hot. He wouldn't stop sweating. It got to the point where it became socially unacceptable because he would just sweat everywhere in class and in front of his friends. He would blast the air conditioning fans blowing all on him, but his body temperature only stayed high. Every time he took it, it put him in a world of pain. The internet forums told CE to be careful of the dose of DNP he was taking, but they always came back and said, "Don't worry about it, you'll be fine." But one day, 8 months later, CE wasn't fine. In the morning, he took his dose, which should have been it for the day, but then he took a nap and woke up confused and took a second dose, thinking it was his first again, and that was the last thing that he'd remember for the next several days. In the afternoon, CE's brother walked into the house. He heard that the shower was on, bathroom door was open. He found CE on the floor, naked and groaning as cold water was running all over him.
My brother-in-law walks by and immediately knows something is wrong. And all I would get out is, get me Coca-Cola and a milkshake from Steak and Shake. Because at this point, my body is ravaging every store of energy I have. And he went out and got it. By the time he came back, I had lost responsiveness. And so he calls the paramedics. I was under the assumption that ownership of DMP is illegal, was also very stubborn, so to admit that I was in any kind of danger was difficult. And also I didn't really want to incur that financial cost of an ambulance ride. And so I sent them away. But once again, I lost consciousness. And once again, my brother-in-law finds me and he calls the paramedics a second time.
The brother-in-law asks what was wrong, but he couldn't get a coherent response as he calls for 911 and CE is brought to the emergency room where we are now. At examination, CE is sweaty, confused, and trembling. He's in respiratory failure, but his measured body temperature is normal, and a blood test finds that his kidneys and his liver are shutting down. CE drifts in and out of consciousness. He has periods where he can be responsive, but he won't tell doctors exactly what he had taken because he was scared that he would get in trouble. CE thought it was illegal to take DNP, but in the United States, it's unlawful to manufacture, market, and sell for human consumption. So he probably wouldn't have gotten in trouble, but the people who sold it to him could. Usually, in a previously healthy 22-year-old man with no past medical history who's sweaty, in respiratory failure, with a fast heartbeat, the first thing doctors think of is stimulant use. Being the end of summer, this is especially dangerous because stimulant substance deaths have a higher incidence on days when it's hot outside because that increased ambient temperature makes it harder for one to dissipate heat caused by the intake of a stimulant, but CE's urine screen returned nothing. As the hours pass, CE's body temperature starts to rise. He's transferred into the intensive care unit because his organ shutdown was getting worse. All of this happening while he was intermittently combative with medical staff. They sedate him and stick a tube down his throat so that a machine could breathe for him. This medically induced coma could help the medical team somewhat, but with his body temperature quickly rising, his proteins start to deform. Basic bodily functions no longer happen. It's like his body is cooking itself alive.
Ew.
And this is life-threatening if nothing is done about it immediately. Doctors still have no idea what CE had taken. His brother-in-law had no idea either. Problems like his kidneys and liver shutting down and high body temperature usually correct when the underlying problem is fixed. But without knowing what CE had taken, there's no way for doctors to fix that underlying problem. If they knew, they could give an antidote or they could give something that could reverse and counteract everything that is happening, but they didn't know. In the intensive care unit, doctors place cooling pads on CE to try to lower his body temperature. They hydrate him with chilled IV fluids to push water into his kidneys. Both of these help his fever and his kidney failure directly, but they don't fix the underlying problem. And finally, CE's brother breaks the silence and tells doctors about the DNP that CE had been taking for weight loss for at least the last 8 months. This was in addition to other fat loss substances, including thyroid hormone, ephedrine, and clenbuterol. And this explains to doctors exactly what is happening. DNP is 2,4-dinitrophenol. People know the word nitro and associate it with explosives, like nitroglycerin, the thing that goes boom in dynamite, or a nitro engine in a car. Dinitrophenol can also be explosive, and if nitroglycerin is used today to treat chest pain and heart problems, then dinitrophenol could have biological activity too, right? Explosions are a quick release of heat, and CE's body is hot and doctors can't cool him down fast enough. DNP isn't exploding in his body, but it's doing something. The mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, produces energy for the body. To produce energy means creation of heat, but how exactly is that energy made? This brings us to a concept called a gradient. Protons, also known as hydrogens or acid, get pumped out from the mitochondrial matrix. This is a place where important chemical reactions happen. When protons get pumped out of the matrix, they accumulate in this intermembrane space. This creates tension. Nature prefers a relaxed state. To be relaxed means to be perfectly balanced, as all things should be. But if more protons are sitting on one side, then that means that a gradient exists. Those protons will want to spread out and be less crowded, so they'll want to move back into the matrix, back to the side with less protons. But something's wrong. In living systems, most chemicals that have a charge, positive or negative, can't just cross through a membrane on their own. Cells don't let charged chemicals in. Protons have a positive charge, so they can't just cross back into the matrix. And the mitochondria is smart. It allows those proteins back into the matrix, but only if they go through a specific pore. And in going through this pore, those protons are exploited and used to create adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is the energy created by the powerhouse of the cell. But what happens if a chemical like DNP isn't charged at first, so it can cross freely through the cells to bring protons into the matrix? And then it leaves somehow, but then it comes back with more protons. And it keeps doing this until there's no more gradient. Then protons don't want to move because things are already balanced and relaxed. Then the mitochondria can't exploit them anymore to create energy. This could be what happens. I explain more on my second channel, Heme Review, why I have some questions about this idea. Add it to your Watch Next queue if it's in your recommended, or check the link in the description below. If mitochondria is short-circuited by DNP and it can't exploit protons to make ATP, then it needs to do other things to compensate for this loss in energy production. Sugars are a good source of energy, so break them down faster to keep up. One reason why we have fat tissue in our body is to have stored energy. And if the mitochondria is desperate to keep up energy production, then it needs to start burning those stores because cells start to panic. Dinitrophenol has stopped the normal process. All of this creating heat. And because CE took multiple doses accidentally, this process is amplified, creating even more heat as his body starts cooking itself alive. The internet forum was right. DNP burns fat. It burns sugar in the muscles. It blows up the process to make energy. The energy expenditure dissipates as heat. At some doses, it's uncomfortable, socially unacceptable sweating. At high doses, it's hyperthermia. Hyper meaning high, and thermia referring to heat or temperature of the body. High body temperature to the point of denaturing enzymes and proteins and shutting down the organs. But this isn't the only thing raising CE's body temperature. His brother told doctors that CE had also been taking thyroid hormone. This increases the body's metabolism, gets used in some circles to help boost weight loss. Ephedrine also raises body temperature, and clenbuterol is a chemical used that moves the body towards fight or flight mode, which would cause it to be more active to burn more energy and thus result in higher body temperature. So you can see a common theme here. The idea of using a chemical to boost metabolism to help lose weight isn't new. The simplified version is if you can expend more energy per day than you put into your body, then over time, you will start to dig into the energy stores of your body, the fat tissue, and then start to lose weight. It's more complicated than that, but let's keep it there for now for simplicity's sake. You can put in less energy to your body daily. We call that dieting. You can expend more energy. We call that exercising and being more active. The problem is that people often jump right into it and suddenly drop their calories from whatever thousands per day to, let's say, 400 calories a day. They go super hard on the exercising on day one. They don't even ease themselves into it, and they'll get good results for a couple of weeks, but then they plateau, and then they stop making progress. There's no more room to make changes, and even if they try to exercise harder, they could get physically sick. At this point, just after a few weeks, the worst part is they may not have even actually burned off fat tissue, just the sugar stored in the liver and in the muscle. That's tied to water, so if one checks the scale every day, and I would suggest checking less frequently, that's where they're going to see their progress in the numbers alone. And being burned out means that they'll start relaxing, or they might quit altogether and then rebound, and then they'll say that it never worked. When you diet, start easy. Give yourself many options to change, and then tighten as time goes on. It can be as simple as removing a sauce that you normally eat at lunchtime, or removing a quarter of your dinner, running that change for a week, and then reassessing afterwards. It's at the plateau point that some people will seek outside help if they don't quit. They go to online forums, or they ask people at their gym. Some will get supplements that you can buy at the store, which I would be careful with, and some others get into the hardcore stuff, bringing us back to CE. In the intensive care unit, doctors have no antidote for DNP. There's no way to suck it out of his mitochondria. Whatever he took, his body will need to pass it on his own. And while that's happening, doctors can treat the symptoms, but there isn't much else that they can do. Except, maybe there is one thing. Doctors use a medicine called dantrolene, which can be used in the setting of hyperthermia. This medicine supposedly prevents calcium from getting released into the muscle cells. Calcium causes the muscle to commit to a contraction, which by itself would create heat. Calcium also sends inside signals to cells, which in this case could help lower heat production there. Every little bit can help. It doesn't always help, but maybe it's in the cards for CE. 5 hours after the first dose of dantrolene, CE's hyperthermia resolved, and it never came back. Over the next 36 hours, 4 more doses were given. On the 4th day after presenting to the emergency room, the tube that was down his throat was pulled out by him as he regained consciousness. The thing about admission into the intensive care unit is that for several days you're not really moving. You're sedated and a machine is breathing for you. You're fed nutrients intravenously, and it's the bare minimum to keep you alive. As a result, even though CE is muscular and was fit, he is going to need physical therapy for at least the next several months because of muscle breakdown that happened in his body, not because of the DMP alone, but because of how tough it was to keep him alive in the ICU. I don't recommend anyone take this stuff from a medical standpoint that I've seen, and from a personal standpoint, having been in this world earlier in my life. And I know someone's going to say that this is no more dangerous than taking aspirin. They could be right, except the incentive for taking aspirin is to relieve pain. Once the pain is gone, you don't want to take more. But the incentive for DNP is that you take it to lose weight. There's no telling where the bottom is. So even if the weight is gone, one could just keep taking and taking because the fundamental reason is different than aspirin. Someone making that argument might not agree, but I know someone who can speak from their own experience.
I just want to really highlight how I shouldn't be alive today. Had I lived alone, I would have been dead. Had my brother-in-law just left me alone in the shower, I would have been dead. Had I just gone up to my room instead of going into the shower, I wouldn't be here. You know, so many people die from this drug and don't have the opportunity to tell this story. I'm sure there's a lot of people that take it, safely and have good experiences with it, but it's such a gamble and it's such a risk. The second you take DMP, you're strapping yourself into an experience that has to run its course. When you go into the ER with a knife wound, a gunshot wound, all those medical professionals know what they're dealing with. They know how to save your life. You go in and you won't tell the doctors you're on DMP. They've never even heard of DMP before. You're putting yourself at a significant disadvantage to getting medical care. Yes, DMP is this super, kind of tempting idea of radical weight loss. But it's interesting because if you are the kind of person that struggles to lose weight in other ways, there's the extreme hunger that you'll experience with DMP, there's the misery that you'll experience with DMP. So it's not nearly the promised miracle chemical that you're believing in. I strongly advocate to create healthier relationships with your body, create healthier relationships with your mind, explore weight loss in terms of changing things for the better, and that's what will lead to sustainable and healthy, kind of change in your body.
After an ICU admission, a lesson learned about messing with fat loss chemicals, and a continuing journey of self-improvement, CE made a full recovery, and you can see him on his YouTube channel, link in the description below. The full interview with CE is on my Heme Review channel here. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself and be well. A boy ate only potato chips and French fries for 10 years. This is what happened to his eyes. DA is a 17-year-old boy presenting to the emergency room with a progressive deterioration in hearing, sight, and vitality. He tells the admitting nurse that his field of vision had been slowly going dark over the last several months, and a ringing in his ears had been washing out his hearing for some time. You see, DA was an average teenager. He didn't take any medicines or have any past history of disease. At his age, he didn't have any records of recurring behavior. A few years earlier, a 14-year-old DA came in for his regular checkup. He reported good health, but some chronic tiredness, and told the doctor that he preferred eating only French fries, potato chips, and white bread because he enjoyed their texture. A blood test at this visit noted that DA had macrocytic anemia,
An meaning without, and emia meaning presence of blood. His blood cells were larger than normal, and he didn't have a lot of them floating around in his body. Less blood cells means less oxygen getting to the brain, which could explain his chronic tiredness. This was accompanied by a marked vitamin B12 deficiency,
that's
unifying
me.
all his problems. Low vitamin B12 causes anemia. Potato chips, french fries, and white bread are completely devoid of vitamin B12. The body doesn't make B12 on its own, but that's okay because basic foods like eggs, beef, yogurt, and fortified cereals have it, so it's almost impossible to miss. But his levels are low, so DA was given vitamin injections to boost his levels. The doctor gave him dietary advice to add more variety in his foods, and 14-year-old DA was sent home with no problems. Several months after that first visit, DA was examined by a different doctor. He complained that there were spots hanging out in front of his eyes. An MRI of his brain found no abnormalities, and a slit lamp exam returned normal. Nothing seemed to be the problem, and there were no signs of immediate life-threatening injury, so come back if you have more problems, they told him. Over the next several months, DA noticed something wrong when his field of vision started going dark. Maybe looking at screens for too long, he thought. One day, he turned his headphones to the maximum volume, and he could barely hear anything. Probably watched too many of those loud meme videos, he thought. Skin deep, DA appeared to be healthy, but a neuro-ophthalmology examination finds bilateral central visual field defects, confirming blind spots in his field of view. Nerve fiber loss was detected in both eyes, but his motor and cognitive functions were normal. All of this pointing to some potential neurodegeneration localized to his optic nerves. There was definitely something happening to him. As the days go by, DA is acutely aware of his deteriorating sight in both of his eyes. Normal vision is typically 20/20, meaning that you can see something that's 20 feet away, but DA's vision is 20/200, meaning that for an object that's 200 feet away, he needs to be 20 feet from it to see it. That's the E on the chart, and by definition, 2200 is legally blind in the United States. A slit lamp examination finds no abnormalities in optic nerve appearance. No visible damage can be seen. Typically, an injury to the brain may cause visual field defects, but a second MRI confirmed no lesions present. These need to be ruled out immediately because they could signal an immediate life-threatening emergency. A test was administered for Leber hereditary optic neuropathy. Neuro referring to the nerves, opathy meaning a disorder, and optic referring to the eye. A disorder of the nerves of the eyes. This genetic disease is characterized by painless vision loss in both eyes that disproportionately affects young males. It's not common, but it's almost a perfect fit. However, his test returned negative. Analysis of DA's blood reveals the same macrocytic anemia found at his original checkup from 3 years ago, but this time, something's wrong. Malnutrition is well documented to cause optic neuropathy, but subsequent testing of his liver, thyroid, and vitamin B12 levels returned normal. DA's history of B12 injections from 3 years ago had lapsed, meaning that he hadn't received them for quite some time now. If it's possible that a lack of this vitamin could be causing DA's vision loss, but his B12 levels are normal and he still has that anemia from his initial visit, then what could be going on? Well, there's some biochemistry to be known here. Vitamin B12 is a coenzyme, meaning it's a chemical needed by an enzyme to function properly. An enzyme is a protein that makes a chemical reaction happen. If there's a problem with an enzyme in the body, no chemicals, or maybe the wrong chemicals, are made in the cells, which can cause disease. In humans, vitamin B12 coenzymes for two specific enzymes. In the mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, B12 works on methylmalonyl coenzyme A mutase to feed into the cycle that produces ATP, which is what the cell uses for energy. In the cell nucleus, vitamin B12 works on the enzyme methionine synthase, which drives the process of synthesizing DNA, allowing cells to generate the necessary genetic material to function. Both of these processes either generate or consume a unique chemical. If normally homocysteine is consumed in the nucleus to help make DNA, then high levels of it would mean that it's not being consumed by the process involving vitamin B12, meaning that B12 is likely absent. If methylmalonic acid is produced in high amounts instead of the correct chemical to produce energy for the cell, then it means that vitamin B12 is probably absent. As the medical team orders homocysteine and serum methylmalonic acid levels in DA, the results come in at 3 times higher than the upper limit of normal for both, meaning that even if DA's B12 levels in the blood are normal, he is functionally deficient. But how? In America, Europe, and Australia, a common cause of B12 deficiency is malabsorption. Mal meaning bad, and absorption denoting the process whereby one mass is incorporated into another, meaning that it's not that people aren't consuming it, but that their body isn't allowing them to have it. B12 is almost everywhere, and clinical starvation is just not usual in the overwhelming majority of people in these countries. This problem of absorption is important because the vitamin doesn't just float around in your body, it has to be carefully escorted in the GI tract. You see, the stomach isn't just a bag that holds chewed food. It produces a protein known as intrinsic factor, which binds to B12, and this intrinsic factor vitamin B12 complex gets absorbed in the far end of the small intestines. The problem is the body can sometimes send the immune system to wrongly attack the stomach, preventing intrinsic factor production, so that B12 never gets absorbed. This autoimmune disease can become worse in a person and attack other parts of the body like the pancreas and cause type 1 diabetes, but DA has no evidence of autoimmune disease or genetic disease or underlying brain injury, meaning that the small detail of his diet actually consisting of only French fries and potato chips is the cause of this malnutrition. This isn't to say that he was lying and wasn't believable about his dietary intake, but without writing down and recording meticulously what someone eats every day, it's easy to miscalculate details about one's own food. This concentrated lack of variety in his diet and absence of a vital nutrient is the cause of his problems, which brings us back to the idea of a coenzyme. DA presented at age 14 with macrocytic anemia. To be oversized means that something was wrong in the cellular DNA, and DNA is in the cell nucleus, where vitamin B12 cofactors for the enzyme methionine synthase to help drive the cycle to produce genetic material. Without B12, those materials aren't properly made. This impairs the maturation of the nucleus, limiting the rate of DNA repair and limiting the blood cell's ability to hold oxygen, but the cell's overall maturation isn't impaired, and this dyssynchrony means that less cells are created, and each one is larger than normal, which brings us directly to the definition of macrocytic anemia, without a presence of blood where each cell is larger than normal. But this isn't the end of DA's problems. In the cellular mitochondria, absence of B12 prevents the production of ATP, which is energy. But as the mitochondria tries to make more energy, it starts to use the wrong chemicals. This might be okay in tissues that don't really need a constant fresh source of energy. The muscles can recycle some of the correct molecules and still function. Other parts of the body that don't move don't need so much mechanical energy, so they can do for some time without it too. But how about the nerves? The nerves are covered in a fatty myelin sheath to help conduct signals. Fat is energy dense. It absolutely needs the right molecules to be properly formed. If the wrong chemicals are being used because the right chemicals just aren't present, then the myelin sheath doesn't develop properly. Small vacuoles begin to creep their way in, forming gaps. Over time, swelling and separation of the sheaths develop into lesions that begin to scatter. The myelin becomes spongy and no longer the formed sheath that it should be, coalescing into a combined degeneration, impairing nerve conduction. If the nerves can't properly conduct a signal, minimal communication happens. Without a signal, the brain can't interpret sensory information. And if parts of his optic nerve become damaged because vitamin B12 wasn't present for methylmalonyl-CoA mutase to convert propional-CoA to succinyl-CoA so that the Krebs cycle in the cell can properly produce the ATP and fatty acids needed for its synthesis of its myelin sheath, then this could explain why DA has become legally blind from his strict diet of French fries and potato chips, because these are the foods that are devoid of vitamin B12. This didn't have to happen. Optic neuropathy has a long list of causes. Nutrition is not typically the first thing that anyone medically trained in America, Europe, and Australia think of, because malnutrition, especially in the context of vitamin B12, is not common. DA's body weight was well within average for his height. He didn't look malnourished from the outside, but if doctors just thought of nutritional optic neuropathy right from the start and simply just stopped and didn't look into the other causes of his blindness, in this case, they would have been correct. But what if it wasn't nutritional in origin? What if they missed a more common and life-threatening cause of his blindness and let that disease progress? You can't just stop at a nutritional cause in this case without ruling out the other possible etiologies. There's a lot of CYA in medicine, and this is a very clear example of it. Do you remember the name of the stomach protein, intrinsic factor? Well, humans didn't know what the extrinsic factor that binds to it to alleviate the pernicious anemia that these patients were getting. In the late 1800s, doctors started feeding patients with this deficiency raw animal liver with some success. This was the dietary extrinsic factor at play because liver, we know now, has a lot of vitamin B12. A Nobel Prize was won in 1934 for those experiments. Decades later, humans used X-ray crystallography to see what extrinsic factor, or what we know now as vitamin B12, looks like. And Professor Dorothy Hodgkin was the winner of the Nobel Prize for doing exactly that, paving the way for it to be synthesized in the lab, to be added to foods, to make supplements out of it and injection formulations of it if their stomach won't allow them to absorb it, to have it so that most people just can't miss it because we know without it, this deficiency will cause anemia and neurodegeneration ranging from a simple mood impairment to blindness and dementia. But some people will always slip through the cracks. The people most susceptible to B12 deficiency today are those who follow an abnormally strict vegetarian or vegan diet, who wrongly refuse supplementation, who don't eat cereals which in the United States are almost all fortified with vitamin B12. For DA, vitamin B12 injections were restarted. He was counseled for his eating habits. Problems coming from B12 deficiency can be reversible if caught early. And while his rate of vision loss stabilized, DA's optic neuropathy and associated hearing loss was not reversed. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself and make sure you get your vitamins, although not 150 gummy vitamins for breakfast. And be well.
don't know if I'm gonna stream anymore. It just makes me look obsessively at chat, even though there's rarely ever any. Don't know. Helps me be productive, but I don't know.